The next morning, millionaire Alexander gently opened the door to his wife's bedroom, and couldn't believe his eyes. Just yesterday, his wife had been deathly pale and barely breathing. Now, she was sitting up, propped against a pillow. And sitting next to her, right on the edge of the bed, was the very same homeless woman he had reluctantly let into the house the day before. Victoria was quietly laughing at something the stranger had said, a faint blush of life on her cheeks. Alexander froze in the doorway. Was this real? The night before, he had feared the worst, terrified that his beloved wife wouldn't make it till morning. Just yesterday, it seemed like all hope was gone. Victoria had been fading away from a serious illness, and the best doctors and the most expensive medications had done nothing. Alexander had spent days and nights at her bedside, exhausted and desperate. He hadn't slept, afraid he might miss her last breath. That evening, drained and lost, Alexander had happened to glance out the window. Outside the tall gates, in the light autumn drizzle, stood a lone woman. A drifter in an old coat, trying to shield herself under a tree from the cold. Normally, Alexander ignored people like her. But something shifted in him that night, pity, maybe, or hopelessness. On impulse, and surprising even himself, he invited the woman inside. He didn't really know why. All right. Let her in. I've got nothing left to lose, he thought bitterly. Alexander stepped out into the rain and called to the woman. She froze at first, staring at him with frightened eyes. Come in. You can spend the night somewhere warm, he said in a rough voice. She approached hesitantly, clutching a worn-out bag to her chest. Her pale, weary face showed a mixture of shock and hope. Thank you, she whispered, lowering her eyes. Alexander nodded curtly and led the trembling guest inside. In the kitchen, the housekeeper, Sarah, was stunned to see the poorly dressed stranger. Alexander gave her a short command. Sarah, feed her and prepare a bed. Maybe we shouldn't, the housekeeper began. I've made up my mind. Just do it, he cut her off. Sarah pursed her lips but obeyed. Leaving the guest to warm up in the kitchen, Alexander tiptoed back to his wife's room. Victoria lay still, barely breathing. He sank into the armchair by her bed and gently took her cold hand in his. Why does she have to suffer like this, he thought bitterly, looking at her drawn face. She's done so much good for others. He remembered how joyful and kind Victoria used to be. She had worked as a teacher, cared for children who weren't even her own, helped anyone who needed it. And now she herself was dying, and no one could save her. Alexander shut his eyes tightly, fighting back tears of helplessness. He would give up everything, his entire fortune, for a miracle. Exhausted, he dozed off at her bedside, still clutching her hand. A quiet moan woke him. He jerked upright. Victoria was gasping. Her body shook with each breath. Alexander panicked, fumbling with the medicine bottles on the nightstand, trying to remember which one to use. His hands trembled, and his heart pounded in his throat. Oh God! What do I do? He whispered in terror. Then, behind him, came a calm female voice. Let me help. Alexander spun around. The guest was standing in the doorway. She stepped in timidly. You. What are you? He began, but another moan from Victoria stopped him. I know how to care for the sick, the woman said softly. Please, let me see her. Alexander stepped aside, stunned. There was no time to hesitate. Victoria's face was growing even paler. The woman quickly moved to the bed and placed her hand on Victoria's forehead, then her neck to check the pulse. Her movements were precise, confident. Alexander watched in disbelief. She moved like a trained nurse. High fever, rapid heartbeat, she murmured, glancing at her watch. She needs fresh air and something for the arrhythmia. She opened the window wide, letting in the cool night air. Then she soaked a clean cloth in water and laid it on Victoria's forehead. The patient moaned, but her breathing eased a little. Alexander held his breath. The woman calmly picked out the right vial from the nightstand. "Are you a nurse?" he asked quietly, stunned by her skill. "I used to be," she replied in the same quiet tone. "I'll explain later. Right now we need to lower the fever." She reached under the blanket to find Victoria's arm and gently lifted it. "Help me reposition her. She needs a pillow behind her back to breathe more easily." Together, they gently turned Victoria onto her side and slid a flat pillow under her ribcage. The sick woman exhaled, a little more freely. "That's better now," the stranger whispered encouragingly. "If only we had some herbal tea. Do you have boiling water?" "I'll get it." Alexander called out and rushed to the kitchen. A minute later, he returned with a kettle and a clean mug. The woman pulled a small bundle of dried herbs from her pocket, sprinkled a bit into the mug, and poured the hot water over them. A warm, spicy aroma filled the room. "It's my heart-soothing blend," she explained quietly. "My grandmother taught me. I always carry some with me." She gently blew on the tea and carefully brought it to Victoria's lips. Though barely conscious, Victoria managed to take a couple of small sips. Minutes passed in tense silence. Alexander sat close, watching his wife's face. Little by little, her breathing calmed. The burning heat on her forehead began to fade. Her lips were no longer blue. She seemed to settle into a light sleep. "I think the crisis has passed," the woman said softly, brushing a damp strand of hair from Victoria's forehead. "Now she needs to rest and change into something dry." Alexander nodded, still in shock. The stranger deftly pulled the damp sheet out from under Victoria and wiped away the sweat. Together, they helped change her into a dry nightgown. The patient hardly stirred, though her lips moved faintly, as if trying to say something in her sleep. "There, that's good," the woman murmured, tucking the blanket around her. "Sleep, dear, just sleep." For the first time in what felt like forever, the bedroom was quiet. Victoria was breathing deeply and calmly. Alexander could hardly believe it. Just an hour ago, he thought he was going to lose her. Now, she was resting peacefully, the worst seemingly behind them. He turned to the mysterious guest, who had slumped tiredly into a chair beside the bed. "Maria," she said, noticing his gaze. "Call me Maria." "You saved her, Maria." I have no words," Alexander whispered, his throat tight. "Thank you doesn't even begin to cover it." "Don't thank me," she said, shaking her head. "I'm just glad I got here in time. But it's too soon to celebrate. Your wife is still very weak." "Then please, stay with us a while," Alexander said urgently. "We need someone like you. I'll pay you well. Just don't leave." "Let's talk tomorrow," she replied gently. "You should get some sleep now. I'll stay with her and watch over her till morning." Alexander wanted to argue, but he realized he could barely stand. He looked at his wife one last time. She was sleeping quietly, without pain, for the first time in days. He stepped out, leaving Maria to keep watch by her side. The next morning brought a stunning sight. Victoria was awake, smiling even, as she talked with her unexpected savior. Still blinking in disbelief, Alexander stepped closer to the bed. His wife weakly squeezed his hand. "I feel better, Alex," she said in a soft but clear voice. "It's thanks to Maria. She's like an angel, I don't know how else to explain it." Alexander stood frozen. For the first time in months of anguish and despair, hope returned to the room. His eyes welled up. He gently took his wife's hand and kissed it, his face lit with the joy of a child. Then he turned to Maria, the same woman he'd let into his home the day before, not knowing why, barely seeing past her worn coat and tired face. "Maria," he said, his voice low, reserved, but with growing warmth and trust. "I don't even know how to thank you. You truly saved her." Maria stood quietly, her gaze lowered, hands clasped behind her back as if unsure what to do with herself. She looked away quickly and replied softly. I didn't do anything special. I just stayed and did what I knew. And you helped me too. You let me in when I had nowhere to go. Everyone has their burdens. She said it quietly, almost apologetically. There was no pride in her voice, no self-importance, just a deep, warm humility filled with weariness and quiet dignity. Just then, Sarah peeked into the room. The housekeeper gasped when she saw her mistress not only awake but actually talking and smiling, faintly, but genuinely. She stood frozen for a second, then seemed to remember how she had tried to keep Alexander from letting the stranger in. She stepped forward. I'm sorry, Maria. I was just worried about Alexander and his wife. He was desperate, and I only wanted what was best for him. I was tired. I didn't mean to be rude. Maria nodded but said nothing. She wasn't one to hold grudges. She'd seen too much in life to be bothered by things like that. Sarah quickly turned and hurried off to the kitchen to make tea and warm up some food, trying, in her own way, to make up for her coldness the day before. That was her nature, after all. Alexander moved closer to Maria, studying her face. He wasn't someone who changed his mind easily. In business, he'd learned to be firm, sometimes too firm. He was used to keeping distance, staying in control. That's why just yesterday, he had reluctantly let this stranger into his home, not knowing who she was or what to expect. It was more instinct than decision, exhaustion, despair, or maybe something in her eyes that stopped him. Now he no longer saw a homeless wanderer or a random guest. He saw someone to whom he owed everything. You didn't just stay by her side, Maria, Alexander said slowly. You did what no doctor or medicine could do. Today, for the first time in days, she woke up with clear eyes and spoke. That was you, wasn't it? You pulled her back from the edge. Forgive me, but who are you really, Maria? She looked a bit embarrassed, her shoulders dropping as she glanced away, as if his question caught her off guard. She was silent for a few seconds, then spoke quietly. Maria Thompson. I worked as a nurse for over 20 years. First in a children's hospital, then in hospice care. I worked with all kinds of patients. I'm not a doctor, but I knew how to treat, how to comfort, when to speak, when to just hold a hand. Sometimes that's more important than any injection. She paused and continued in a softer voice. And then everything collapsed. There was a tragedy at the hospital where I worked. A patient died. It was a complicated situation, doctor mistakes, administrative negligence. But they needed a scapegoat, and that was me. Probably because I don't know how to yell or defend myself. They suspended me, then fired me. I tried to fight it, but it was no use. I lost my staff apartment, had barely any money left. I moved from town to town, trying to find any job. But no one would hire me. A medical reputation is fragile, even when you're not at fault. Silence fell over the room. Maria wasn't justifying herself or asking for pity, she was simply stating the facts. Calm, steady, with dignity. She stood tall, never raising her voice, and that only made her story feel even heavier. Alexander said nothing. He realized he was looking at someone who had been crushed by the system but had never let it break her. Someone who asked for nothing, yet still gave everything she had, even when it seemed she had nothing left. He turned to his wife, who gave a weak nod, no words were needed. Her eyes said it all, they were thinking the same thing. Maria, he said calmly, but firmly, please stay with us. For as long as you can, however long you want. Not as a guest, as one of us. We want to hire you officially. Proper pay, proper conditions, proper respect. We can't do this without you. Maria didn't respond right away. She looked unsure, as if she hadn't heard him correctly. Her eyes drifted away, hands tightening and loosening again. After a pause, she whispered. "Thank you. I don't know what to say. I'd almost forgotten what it feels like to be needed. Not pitied. Not tolerated. Needed." She looked at the sick woman, who was still weak but smiling at her with real warmth, and spoke again. "I couldn't leave now, even if I wanted to. My heart is already attached to her. I want to stay, not just as a caregiver, but as someone who truly cares. I know how much that matters. It's not just the shots or the pills, it's the eyes, the voice, the hands. Patients feel that. Even when they don't speak, they feel everything." Alexander, the strict, controlled businessman who lived by numbers and contracts, suddenly felt his throat tighten. He nodded silently and stepped aside, as if to hide the emotions rushing to the surface. Maria remained by the bed, gently adjusting the blanket over the woman who, for the first time in days, felt truly at peace. And just like that, the homeless woman from the street became the nurse in the millionaire's home. Under Maria's care, Victoria grew stronger by the day. Within 2 weeks, she could sit up and even walk around the room with her husband's help. Alexander wanted to repay Maria with more than just money and a place to stay. Through his contacts, he quietly worked to restore her reputation, no headlines, no drama, just results. So that when the time came, if she wanted to return to her profession, the doors would be open again. Not as a favor, but because someone like Maria belonged in that calling. Still, what he was most grateful for was that fate had brought her into their home in their darkest hour. Looking back, Alexander knew that despair had nearly destroyed him. But Maria's kind heart had saved Victoria, and returned hope to their family. No one saw her as a homeless woman anymore. Maria had become a cherished friend of the household. And Alexander would never forget the lesson: one act of compassion toward a stranger brought him the greatest gift of all, the life of the woman he loved. From that moment on, their home was filled with joy and laughter again. Victoria recovered, and every day she thanked fate for bringing Maria into their lives. As for the millionaire, he helped his new companion start a new life, and never again looked away from someone else's pain. He now knew with certainty, kindness always comes back, and miracles happen where love and compassion live. If this story touched your heart, share it with your loved ones. Let it remind us all how important it is to stay human, kind, compassionate, and grateful. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss new stories. And let us know in the comments where